And it is day 66 of the 100 Days of Narration Challenge. I don't know why I'm doing this. I'll stop now. Okay. Okay, that's good. Okay, so day 66. Speaking of land milestones, landstones, milestones, one of those two. I mean, there is my big 70 coming up, but 66, that's like 2/3 of the way. Well, 67 would be closer to 2/3 of the way, but 66 is still close enough to make a milestone. Maybe I'll wait until 67. I'll wait until 67 or 70 or one of those two. Anyway, day 66 of the 100 Days of Narration Challenge. And for today's book, because this is Roald Dahl week, I decided to pick another Roald Dahl book, going back to children's books. And this time we're going to do The Magic Finger, which I don't think is not exactly a classic most people remember from Roald Dahl, I think. Or at least not that readily sticks to my mind, anyway. It's a young puffin book, which means it's one of those read-alone books where, like, you're expected, if you are a young reader, learning how to do the readings from the eyes into your brain, then you would be reading this book, and you would be reading about a magic finger. You know, I can tell you all about my magic finger if you want to hear about it. You know, my magic finger, if you know what I mean. Yes. You're a dirty man, Evan. You're a dirty, horrible man, and you're ruining this children's book for people everywhere. Aren't magic fingers like an actual brand of, well, feminine product? Feminine product requiring batteries? And, you know, it's used in... Okay, just going to keep reading this. Not that I've actually started reading yet, but looking at the back of this. It's actually a very short book. I think I could possibly read through the entire thing because it's like really huge type. Like I could probably go through one page in 15 seconds or something like that. And it's only about 61... Okay, so it is actually 60 pages, but still, it's a very slim book. But let's have a read at the blurb at the back here. Have you ever heard of a girl with a magic finger? The little girl in the story is very unusual. When someone makes her angry, and when she just can't stop herself, she flashes a punishment on them with a magic flashing finger. The results are fantastic, magical, and very funny. Another remarkable fantasy by the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, and Fantastic Mr. Fox. Don't worry, we'll get to Fantastic Mr. Fox soon. You know that I heard it was based upon a movie with George Clooney in it. You know, and yeah, that's ooh, George Clooney. He's such a man, you know, such a fox, such a silver fox. You know, that's why they call him the Fantastic Mr. Fox, because he's just so foxy, such a magnificent silver fox. Oh, and there's more on the blurb. Read alone. First solo reading, ideal for building confidence. Well, it worked for me when I was young, so why wouldn't it work for me now when I'm old and gray and things. Okay. I don't think I'll skip to any particular page, because if I do, it'll just be confusing, because it's short enough as it is, so why pop into the middle of the story when I could just start from the beginning? So here we are at the very beginning. There's a lot of illustrations in here as well, so it's like half the book is pictures. Nice pictures, but still, it's like you're not reading at all, you're just looking at the pictures. The farm next to ours is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Gregg. The Greggs have 2 children, both of them boys. Their names are Philip and William. Sometimes I go over to their farm to play with them. I am a girl, and I am 8 years old. Well, now you know the truth. Edwin Tiong is an 8-year-old girl. You know, I'm so pretty. I have pigtails and curls in my hair. Anyway, Philip is also 8 years old. William is 3 years older. He is 10. What? Oh, all right then. He is 11. Last week, something very funny happened to the Gregg family. I'm going to tell you about it as best I can. Now, the one thing that Mr. Gregg and his 2 boys loved to do more than anything else was to go hunting. Every Saturday morning, they would take their guns and go off into the woods to look for animals and birds to shoot. Even Philip, who was only 8 years old, had a gun of his own. I can't stand hunting. I just can't stand it. It doesn't seem right to me that men and boys should kill animals just for the fun they get out of it. So I used to try to stop Philip and William from doing it. Every time I went over to their farm, I would do my best to talk them out of it. But they only laughed at me. I even said up something about it once to Mr. Gregg, but he just walked on past me, as if I weren't there. Then, one Saturday morning, I saw Philip and William coming out of the woods with their father, and they were carrying a lovely young deer. There's a picture. And more pictures. Flip the page. This made me so cross that I started shouting at them. The boys laughed and made faces at me, and Mr. Gregg told me to go home and mind my own P's and Q's. Mind my own P's and Q's. That's, wow. I haven't heard that phrase and I don't even remember what it's about. Mind your own P's and Q's. Is that like a grammatical thing, or mind your P's and Q's? I don't actually know what it means. Jeez. Okay. Anyway, Mr. Gregg told me to go home and mind my own P's and Q's. Well, that did it. I saw red, and before I was able to stop myself, I did something I never meant to do. I put the magic finger on them all. Oh dear. Oh dear. I even put it on Mrs. Gregg, who wasn't there. I put it on the whole Gregg family. For months, I've been telling myself that I would never put the magic finger upon anyone again, not after what happened to my teacher, old Mrs. Winter. Poor old Mrs. Winter. One day we were in class and she was teaching us spelling. "Stand up," she said to me, "and spell cat." Trying to figure out what voice to use for. "That's an easy one," I said. K-A-T. "You are a stupid little girl," Mrs. Winter said. "I am not a stupid little girl," I cried. "I am a very nice little girl." "Go and stand in the corner," Mrs. Winter said. Then I got cross, and I saw red, and I put the magic finger on Mrs. Winter good and strong, and almost at once. And turn the page. Guess what? Whiskers began growing out of her face. They were long black whiskers, just like the ones you see on a cat, only much bigger. And how fast they grew! Before we had time to think, they were out of her ears. Out of her ears? Out to her ears, rather. Of course, the whole class started screaming with laughter. And then Mrs. Winter said, "Will you be so kind as to tell me what you find so madly funny, all of you?" And then she turned around to write something on the blackboard. We saw that she had grown a tail as well. It was a huge, bushy tail. I cannot begin to tell you what happened after that, but if any of you are wondering whether Mrs. Winter is quite all right again, if any of you are wondering whether Mrs. Winter is quite all right again now, the answer is no, and she never will be. The magic finger is something I have been able to do all my life. I can't tell you just how I do it, because I turn the page, don't even know myself. But it always happens when I get cross, when I see red. Then I get very, very hot all over. Then the tip of my forefinger of my right hand begins to tingle most terribly. And suddenly a sort of flash comes out of me, a quick flash, like something electric. It jumps out and touches the person who has made me cross. And after that, the magic fingers upon him or her. And after that, the magic finger is upon him or her, and things begin to happen. Well, The magic finger was now upon the whole of the Gregg family, and there was no taking it off again. I ran home and waited for things to happen. They happened fast. I shall now tell you what those things were. I got the whole story from Philip and William the next morning, after it was all over. In the afternoon of the very same day that I put the magic finger on the Gregg family, Mr. Gregg and Philip and William went out hunting once again. This time, they were going after wild ducks, so they headed towards the lake. To flip the page. In the first hour, they got 10 birds. In the next hour, they got another 6. "What a day!" cried Mr. Gregg. "This is the best yet!" He was beside himself with joy. Just then, 4 more wild ducks flew over their heads. They were flying very low. They were easy to hit. Bang! 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 Went the guns. The ducks flew on. "We missed," said Mr. Gregg. "That's funny." Then, to everyone's surprise, the 4 ducks turned around and came flying right back to the guns. "Hey," said Mr. Gregg, "what on earth are they doing? They are really asking for it this time." He shot at them again. So did the boys. And again. They all missed. Mr. Gregg got very red in the face. "It's the light," he said. "It's getting too dark to see. Let's go home." So they started for home, carrying with them the 16 birds they had shot before. But the 4 ducks would not leave them alone. They now began flying around and around the hunters as they walked away. Mr. Gregg did not like it one bit. "Be off!" he cried, and he shot at them many more times, but it was no good. He simply could not hit them. All the way home, those 4 ducks flew round in the All the way home, those 4 ducks flew around in the sky above their heads, and nothing would make them go away. Oops, sorry. That's my page-turning hand. Hit the thing which supports my keyboard. You know, that little shelf thing that you pull in and out. Whatever. Late that night, after Philip and William had gone to bed, Mr. Gregg went outside to get some wood for the fire. He was crossing the yard when all at once he heard the call of a wild duck in the sky. Burping, God's sakes. He stopped and looked up. The night was very still. There was a thin yellow moon over the trees on the hill, and the sky was filled with stars. Then Mr. Gregg heard the noise of wings flying low over his head, and he saw the 4 ducks dark against the night sky, flying very close together. They were going around and around the house. Mr. Gregg forgot about the firewood and hurried back indoors. He was now quite afraid. He did not like what was going on, but he said nothing about it to Mrs. Gregg. All he said was, "Come on." Sorry, forgot my voice for Mr. Gregg there. "Come on, let's go to bed. I feel tired." So they went to bed and to sleep. Turn the page. These are very short pages, I have to be honest. And I'm on page 23 already. Christ, I'll get to the end of this before long. When morning came, Mr. Gregg was the first to wake up. He opened his eyes. He was about to put out a hand for his watch to see the time, but his hand wouldn't come out. "That's funny," he said. "Where's my hand?" He lay still, wondering what was up. Maybe he had hurt that hand in some way. He tried the other hand. That wouldn't come out either. He sat up. Then, for the first time, he saw what he looked like. He gave a yell and jumped out of bed. Mrs. Gregg woke up, and when she saw Mr. Gregg standing there on the floor, she gave a yell too. For he was now a tiny little man. He was maybe as tall as the seat of a chair, but no taller, and where his arms had been, he had a pair of duck's wings instead. But, cried Mrs. Gregg, going purple in the face. "My dear man, What's happened to you?" "What's happened to the both of us, you mean?" shouted Mr. Gregg. It was Mrs. Gregg's turn now to jump out of bed. She ran to look at herself in the mirror, but she was not tall enough to see into it. She was even smaller than Mr. Gregg, and she too had got wings instead of arms. "Oh, oh, oh, oh," sobbed Mrs. Gregg. "This is witch's work," cried Mr. Gregg, and both of them started running around the room, flapping their wings. A minute later, Philip and William burst in. The same thing had happened to them. They had wings and no arms, and they were really tiny. They were about as big as robins. "Mama, Mama, Mama," chirped Philip. "Look, Mama, we can fly." And they flew up into the air. "Come down at once," said Mrs. Gregg. "You're much too high." But before she could say another word, Philip and William had flown right out the window. Mr. and Mrs. Gregg ran to the window and looked out. The two tiny boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Gregg said to Mr. Gregg, "Do you think we could do that, my dear?" "I don't see why not," Mr. Gregg said. "Come on, let's give it a try." Mr. Gregg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once, up he went. Then Mrs. Gregg did the same. "Help!" she cried as she started going up. "Save me!" "Come on," said Mr. Gregg. "Don't be afraid." So out the window they flew, far up into the sky. And it did not take them long. Sheesh. It's a very common sequence of words, but I just have trouble with it. And it did not take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried William. "I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a bird." "Your wings are not getting tired, are they, dear?" Mr. Gregg asked Mrs. Gregg. "Not at all," Mrs. Gregg said. "I could go on forever." "Hey, look down there," said Philip. "Somebody is walking in our garden." They all looked down, and there below them, in their own garden, they saw 4 enormous wild ducks. The ducks were as big as men, and what is more, they had great long arms like men instead of wings. The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Gregg's house. The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Gregg's house, swinging their arms and holding their beaks high in the air. "Stop!" cried the tiny Mr. Gregg, flying down low over their heads. "Go away! That's my house!" The ducks looked up and quacked. The first one put out a hand and opened the door of the house, and went in. The first one put out a hand and opened the door of the house and went in. The others went in after him. The door shut. The Greggs flew down and sat on the wall near the door. Mrs. Gregg began to cry. Oh dear, she sobbed. "They've taken our house. What shall we do? We have no place to go." Even the boys began to cry a bit now. "We will be eaten by cats and foxes in the night," said Philip. "I want to sleep in my own bed," said William. "Now then," said Mr. Gregg, "it isn't any good crying. That won't help us. Shall I tell you what we are going to do?" "What?" they said. Mr. Gregg looked at them and smiled. "We are going to build a nest." "A nest?" they said. "Can we do that?" "We must do it," said Mr. Gregg. "We've got to have somewhere to sleep. Follow me." They flew off to a tall tree, and right at the top of it, Mr. Gregg chose a place for the nest. "Now, we want sticks," he said. "Lots and lots of little sticks. Off you go, all of you, and find them and bring them back here." "But we have no hands," said Philip. "Then use your mouths." Mrs. Gregg and the children flew off. Soon they were back, carrying sticks in their mouths. Mr. Gregg took the sticks and started to build a nest. "More," he said. "I want more and more and more sticks. Keep going." The nest began to grow. Mr. Gregg was very good at making the sticks stick together. After a while, he said, "That's enough sticks. Now, I want leaves and feathers and things like that to make the inside nice and soft." The building of the nest went on and on. It took a long time, but at last it was finished. "Try it," said Mr. Gregg, hopping back. He was very pleased with his work. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried Mrs. Gregg, going into it and sitting down. "I feel like I might lay it. I feel I might lay an egg any moment." Not a very common way of saying that, but I feel I might lay an egg any moment. Of course, that's not a typical sentence to say in the first place, so yeah. The others all got in beside her. "How warm it is," said William. "And what fun to be what fun to be living so high up," said Philip. "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." Jeez. "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." Okay, that's better. And then more turning of the page. "But what about food?" said Mrs. Gregg. "We haven't had a thing to eat." "That's right," Mr. Gregg said. "So we will now fly back to the house and go in by an open window and get the tin of biscuits when the ducks aren't looking." Oh, we will be pecked to bits by those dirty great ducks," cried Mrs. Gregg. "We shall be very careful, my love," said Mr. Gregg, and off they went. But when they got to the house, they found all the windows and doors closed. There was no way in. "Just look at that beastly duck cooking at my stove," cried Mrs. Gregg as she flew past the kitchen window. "How dare she!" And now we have pictures of ducks with arms cooking at a stove. That's a fairly atypical thing to see. "And look at that one holding my lovely gun," shouted Mr. Gregg. And we have a picture of a duck with arms holding a shotgun and holding cartridges in one hand. And yeah, these are very interesting pictures to look at. "One of them is lying in my bed," yelled William, looking into a top window. "And one of them is playing with my electric train," cried Philip. And we have the little ducky with little arms and sleeping in a bed, and there's another little ducky, and it's playing with trains, and it's chasing the train, it's going choo-choo, choo-choo. Okay, enough of that. Oh dear, said Mrs. Gregg. "They have taken over our whole house, and we shall never get it back. And what are we going to eat?" I will not eat worms," said Philip. "I would rather die." "Or slugs," said William. Mrs. Gregg took the two boys under her wings and hugged them. "Don't worry," she said. "I can mince it up all very fine, and you won't even know the difference. Lovely slug burgers, delicious worm burgers." "Oh, no," cried William. "Never," said Philip. "Disgusting," said Mr. Gregg. "Just because we have wings, we don't have to eat bird food. We shall eat apples instead. Our trees are full of them. Come on." So they flew off to an apple tree. But to eat an apple without holding it in your hands is not an... But to eat an apple without holding it in your hands is not at all easy. Every time you try to get your teeth into it, it just pushes away. In the end, they were able to get a few small bites each, and then it began to get dark, so they all flew back to the nest and lay down to sleep. I am literally going to go get through this entire book in one sitting, I think. It must have been at about this time that I, back in my own house, picked up the telephone, because back then they actually called it the telephone rather than just phones, or as you kids call it these days, iPhones. Did you know that before iPhones, those things were actually just called Phones? No? Well, now you do. Oh, God. I don't know if that was actually sarcasm or not. I guess there might be kids who don't actually know. Okay. Anyway. It must have been at about this time that I, back in my own house, picked up the telephone and tried to call Philip. I wanted to see if the family was all right. Hello, I said.
Quack,
said a voice at the other end. Who is it? I asked.
Quack, quack.
Philip, I said, is that you?
Quack, 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 quack.
Oh, stop it, I said. Then there came a very funny noise. It was like a bird laughing. I put down the phone quickly. Oh, that magic finger, I cried. What has it done to my friends? You know what? I think I'll stop here. Leave the rest of the story a mystery, even though I'm about 2/3 of the way through, honestly. It's not a very long book. It's you know, it's for young readers. And I've just read it out to you, and it was like, oh, I'm so happy with myself that I can read a book that's meant for me for like children under 10 years old. Oh, so happy with myself. Oh. Anyway, that was day 66 of the 100 Days of Narration Challenge, and that was The Magic Finger by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl. And quite a good book it was, too. So, I guess I will see you tomorrow for day 67, the milestone. Whatever. Milestone 67. And we'll go on with another Roald Dahl book. So, come back for that. Thank you. Hey, you seem like a cool, wonderful, and/or awesome individual with impeccable taste in voice actors. So why not follow me on Facebook or Twitter? You can keep up with the latest projects I'm in, or that my friends are in, or that you could be in, because I occasionally post links to open editions to various projects that require voice acting out there, or that nobody's in, but they're interesting projects nonetheless that you may also find interesting. Also, lots of random thoughts about whatever's on my mind at that particular moment. Usually it's about food or video games, or foodie video games. Anyway, you can follow me on Facebook at OmadonVA or Twitter at Omadon. Hope to see you there.